I've answered questions about or talked about dating and relationships, but listen to the context of this question. Hello, Scott. Could you make a video or give me a tip about how to introduce when it comes to dating, for example? This person's from a different country, so she even said her English is a little broken, so I may have to translate what I think she's saying. I think she's saying introducing dating into your life when you're on a spiritual path. The first example we could come across when asked about is what we like is spirituality, then if the other person is also into spirituality, we are pretty much doomed. We will be talking about spirituality all the time, and we will even end relationships because we're not on the same level. It's quite hard to deal with honesty to the point where I am just thinking of another way to proceed, such as keeping silent. So I think she's saying that in a relationship, when they're not on the same level, she's learning how to try to be silent instead of proceeding into the conflict with the partner. As far as I can tell, that's what she's asking. Last time I've tried, I failed. The other person was also spiritual. Then she asked me about my spiritual progress and told her that she wouldn't be too ready to hear about it, and that pissed her off. I'm laughing because both of my marriages have been examples of this. Let me just talk about my current marriage to Chester. When I met Chester, he wasn't interested in inquiry, wasn't into spirituality much, but he had some issues in his life, like many of us do. And he saw what I was doing, and he became interested slowly. But what I know about this work and the spirituality thing is like it's very much a personal process, and it's I feel like with inquiry or non-dual awakenings, you really can't proselytize it. And when you start getting to conversations that involve one-upsmanship, like where you think that how do I say this? Where you think that your view of things or your experience is more valuable, higher, more enlightened, or whatever. It's almost a recipe for conflict. And I would say, although it's nice to discern where you're at and where others are at, that's nice. If you identify with it, it just creates division and conflict. I talk about this in the last chapter of my first book, Love's Quiet Revolution, how religion and spirituality, when we're identified with our experience or our viewpoints around it, they become a source of division and conflict on earth, just like any other belief system. And it's true of non-duality or awakening. I posted something on YouTube or Facebook the other day that said, don't bother getting someone else to hear your side of the story. You have nothing to prove to them. And it really applies to the spirituality thing because as you can see that these insights and realizations occur, they're destroying you. You, the ego, you're seeing through that. So it's ironic then that while seeing through that, we identify with where we're at in the process, like the point of our resume as it shows up right now, not seeing that how that's an identification or can be. And then we cling to that and then we compare ourselves to others, right? Either others are higher or more evolved or they're lower or more involved. And although there can be some accuracy to that in terms of people are at different places, to what extent do you identify with it? And to what extent is it creating conflict in your relationships? So, through my second marriage, what I did not do with Chester was proselytize at all. In fact, although I would talk to him about inquiry, it was more just because he was my husband and just it was a conversation that came up. Whenever I felt myself wanting to convince him to do inquiry or comparing myself to him, it didn't work well. So mainly after a while and some inquiry, I just went quiet around the subject. In the beginning, I was trying to get him to inquire a little bit because I saw he had some issues, but I saw that pushing pushed him away. So I just went quiet around it. And then if he would bring it up, I would talk about it. But I'll also be aware of anything that I was saying that made it seem like I'm higher or more evolved than him because there's nothing to prove. And if that would happen, and be like, what would be the point of that? other than to stroke my own ego. I don't know what the point of that is because there's literally nothing to prove to anyone in this. And that desire to prove something or to compare oneself to another, where is that coming from? There's something about the realization that's happened with me is like people say early on in the path, they'll say, I don't want to be around people who aren't doing this work because they're stuck in ego. And as I'm coming out of that, this is annoying to be around them. And that was like that for me at first, because I was still making this clear division between awakeness and non awakeness, or different levels of understanding, insight, realization compared to these other levels. And there's still an identification with that on some level. So as I work through that, what comes up is that I can be in the company of someone who I perceive to be very much in ego, and it's fine. I mean, I've been in relationships like that with people like that. It's not an issue. So I'm not trying to surround myself only with people who are awake. That might be a lonely life. There are definitely people out there who have done deep work, but the majority of people haven't. So it's been very freeing to have relationships with people who are not interested in the work, because it shows me then what's still here on my side. Like if I'm around people who don't talk about this, who don't inquire, who don't even have a sense of insight or awareness in their own experience, if that's triggering me, that would be something for me to look at. Because it could be that I'm still identifying with some part of my spiritual resume. Like I believe I'm this, and that person is that. So then I desire not to be around the person. I desire the division. And that division helps me continue to believe in it. Separation. But what if instead you were just in relationship with people who were wherever they were on the path or the whatever, and it never occurred to you to compare yourself to them? Just unless you were feeling deficient. Why else would you do it? A lot of this comparison comes from deficiency story, even at the higher level, so called. The phrase comes up, who cares? Like, who cares? Whether I'm at a higher level or a lower level than someone else, who cares? Ego, that's who cares. I care. Individual, separate self cares about that and is getting something out of that, most likely. Like, I feel superior. I feel special. I feel higher. And that's why I'm making a big deal out of it. If that wasn't there, you would just be in relationship with someone, period. That's all. Just relationship with someone. There wouldn't be the division created by, I'm at this level. You wouldn't understand. So I'm not going to tell you. It's amazing how spirituality has a way of dividing people. But to me, it's the same old thing. It's identification with thought. It's not anything new happening. It's still just happening. Identification with self and where self is in the process. Remember me talking about the measuring mind, that the seeking mind is always concerned about where it's been, where it is now, and where it's going. And the identification with that. And part of that is comparison. So in order to know where I'm at on the trajectory, I've got to compare myself to others. He's higher, he's lower, she's higher, he's right where I'm at. And all of that is the mirror of relationship. So I'm doing all of that to know who I am. Ego. I need those people so that I know who I am. So the measured ego can still be here, the one that measures progress and that thinks it knows where it's going. So instead, yeah, so the question is, what about dating? Go date. If that's you feel called to do that. And then just notice that movement arising where it's like, oh, this person is more evolved or less evolved. So then what does that mean about you? Boomerang it. This is where it can get juicy. Boomerang it. So I'm saying that my partner is less evolved than me. What does that mean about me? I'm enlightened. I'm more evolved. Are those words what you are? Look at those. See those? You could say in a relative sense, you can say anything's true relatively, but do you really believe that? See, are you making it into sort of some absolute truth, like it's really real? Feel into your body. If there's some energy around it, there's the ego there. What if you're what if you're looking at someone you perceive as less evolved or less awake? Excuse me, more evolved, more awake. What does that mirror back? I'm not good enough. I'm not there yet. So there's the story that's operating. So what would it be like where you would look out into the world and it wouldn't even occur to you to decide who is more or less evolved than you? It just wouldn't occur to you to think that way anymore. Imagine how loving that would be towards all people. Generally, there may be some people who are kind of annoying still. I like to be realistic. But imagine how if you don't have a dog in that fight anymore, like you're not looking at the world to confirm your spiritual ego at all anymore. You just don't care. Like you literally don't care. Not like some fake ego thing, but like it just isn't arising for you anymore. Because these things create division. So even if you're not saying it when you're around people, I mean, if someone said to me once, it's like, Scott, you have an inferiority complex and a superiority complex. Years ago, someone said that because you put off a certain energy, even if you don't say things. When you're around people, if you believe that you're more evolved or spiritual or less evolved or less spiritual, you bring the energy to the relationship like that. So they're going to feel it even if you don't say it. There's going to be division there and separation, whether you're thinking it or just feeling it, sensing it, being quiet about it. So there's the division and conflict in the name of non duality. Isn't that funny? In the name of non duality, creations of divisions and conflict based on what my insights or realizations are. So I just want to contemplate for a moment, look out into the world, just imagine like that you just didn't care anymore about where other people were compared to you. How peaceful that would be and how loving, because then you could walk up to someone or date someone and that program isn't running. So you could talk about your spiritual path, but you wouldn't be like clinging to anything that you're saying. So therefore, if someone says something that is different than what you've said, you're not defending that anymore. You're just letting them have their perspective. There's a beautiful thing that shows up in awakening where everyone just gets to have their experience and their perspective. And it's just perfect as it is. And you're not trying to fix it or change it or compare yourself or be above or below it or anything. It's just like, oh, that's your experience. Thanks for telling me. Here's my experience. And then that's it. Religion itself, if there's belief involved with it, is not going to give you that kind of clarity because look at how Muslims and Christians and Buddhists are at sort of war with each other in certain ways about what's really true. And that's in the name of religion. We could do the same thing with non duality. Like, I come from this lineage, and here we work on this, we have a deeper realization, or I'm over here and it's more of a direct path. So, and then we use these things to bolster ego. Even though we're saying that non duality is not about belief, we then bring in our beliefs about these things and they work to bolster and maintain ego identity. If you want to be really radical, challenge every one of your insights of what you think is true spiritual, like literally challenge it, deconstruct it. You don't need it. The ego needs it. But if you're really into truth, let that go, all of it. I think that's what Ajay is talking about when he says, awaken from your awakening. I think he might say that that's part of it, is that when you haven't woken up for your awakening, you're still using it somewhat for your resume. And I mean, when I mean resume is not a paper resume. I mean, you bring it with you, your identifications, with your insights and realizations. You walk into every room, every relationship with that. Or even this. What if you saw that certain realizations are higher or deeper, but you just didn't identify with it? You can still see dimensionality in our experience. You can recognize that Michael Jordan is better at free throws than my neighbor. Dimensionality. Or this teacher is wiser and more helpful than that teacher. Or this realization that I'm having now is deeper and more embodied than I had before. All that's fine to recognize that dimensionality in our experience. But what if you didn't identify with it? What if you were just stating it as like, this is just my experience, but you're not hooked into it? So I'm not even talking about flatland, where it's like we just say everybody's view is equal, we're all equal. Not even saying that. I'm saying not identifying with. So even if you think that there's something that's higher or deeper, that's fine. That's just something that you've discovered. But it's when you identify with it is when ego comes in. And two egos trying to be in a relationship, trying to relate to each other through the mechanism of ego, even if it's spiritual ego, that's going to bring up a lot of issues. Or it could. Just reading her question again. I just have an example here. This is good. In one of her paragraphs, she says, it's quite hard to deal with honesty to the point where I am just thinking of another way to proceed, such as keeping silent. One day, Chester, my husband, was going through some emotional issues, and he was listening to some songs about pain, like how pop songs, rock songs are all about pain. And I said to him, and it's like came out of the blue, I said, well, with a more enlightened consciousness, you don't identify with those lyrics. The lyrics don't solidify the pain in any way. You're not identified with it. It was kind of a shot at him, actually, because it was kind of saying, I'm more enlightened than you are. Maybe there is a greater degree of clarity here or not. The point is when I went to look at it, it wasn't what it appeared to be. So this is the thing I want to talk about now. When we say these things and believe these things, what's underneath it? So for me, that hurt his feelings because it made him feel like he's deficient. Like, oh, you believe you're enlightened, you don't get pulled into those lyrics, but I do. And small little argument started. And then I owned up to what I did, and I was looking in inquiry, like, what was that really about? That was kind of sarcasm, which is fine. Everything arises. But like, where was that coming from? And I recognized that I was concerned or fearful about his state of being at that point. So, but instead of being honest, speaking of honesty, instead of saying, I feel fear about the fact that you still identify with this, and to the extent you're still identifying with certain deficiency stories which could sabotage us. And that scares me. That would have been honest. But instead, you know how we do. It's like we're not emotionally honest sometimes. And instead of being emotionally honest, it comes out as sarcasm or one-upsmanship, ego. Like it's like saying I'm better than you. When what's really underneath is like fear or some trigger. That's why I love inquiry, because in that moment when I said that to him, if I would just rested in awareness, I might not have seen the underlying thing there. But when I went into inquiry, it's like it pulled it right up because it was kind of unconscious. So I got to see it. And then when I saw it, I went right back to him and I said, that was ego. I was afraid, but I couldn't say that. So I just put you down because of my pain. So I wonder where a lot of this is coming from in relationship where people are not connecting because of spirituality or being on different levels. Is it really that you're on a different level? Or is it that something is threatening or something is scary or painful about that and it's bringing up stuff for you? Maybe that would be, speaking of honest, to me, honesty is not just about what you say to people, but it was how you see yourself and whether you're willing to actually look at something. Can we be honest that in a moment when we're judging someone else's path or saying sarcastic things, can we be honest emotionally about what's actually under that? That kind of honesty is radical, and I think can go much deeper than just being honest to people about where you are on your path. Who cares ultimately? That's the thing. Only the ego cares. Only at the identifying mechanism really cares about that. In that moment when I said that to Chester, there was a division, a separation. He felt hurt, and I felt pain because I hurt him. And I was coming from fear and pain. So all of that over spirituality, see how it masquerades as spirituality masquerades as clarity, but it ends up being conceptual and ego based. But even that is a way in to look at it. So honesty. Before I'm honest with another person, I have to be honest within myself with regard to where it's coming from. Otherwise, I'm just going to spew that on them in a blind way, like I did with Chester. But looking at it from within, it's like the honest stuff comes up. I'm afraid that's honest. And then once that's seen, that whole thing died. And I never did that after that. I never said things like that to him after that because I saw where it was coming from. So I just wonder where all this is coming from. You know, that's an invitation to inquiry. I'll be back on YouTube because I have another question.